Now I'm going to go into my acquisition settings. You see we're reading the barcode. One question we often get is, okay, I have many barcodes on the screen. Why am I reading that particular one? When this algorithm out of the box comes, it's set to a single barcode read. What it does is it will actually just read the first barcode that sends that data out. So before I was reading the MFD down on the bottom, that particular data. Now I'm just reading the top one because I found that one first. So that's kind of how that one is worked or handled. So let me go back to my live view here. Now everything is looking much better. So I have an exposure time here. I can move my exposure up. I can move my exposure down to acquire the best image possible. I also have the ability to do some focus adjustment. You can see here as I go and move this around. This is our liquid lens technology. Makes it really nice and easy for and quick for that transition to be able to focus. We also have some diopter settings. We are looking in the near future to make this a engineering unit, so you don't have to be some kind of optometrist to understand or optical engineer to understand what the focus is. What I find most useful is just moving this slider bar by myself, just to see how it adjusts and affects it. We do have the ability to use gain. Gain does introduce noise, but also amplifies the amount of light that is allowed into the sensor or perception of the light to the sensor. You'll also notice this little red line here that we have on this exposure bar. So I am using my internal light. I want to point this out. This is the maximum amount of light that we pulse. So our lights are overdriven pulse lights. When you reach this level or go beyond this level, the effectiveness, or you will not get any more light out of the internal light, I would say. So we wanted to indicate that with this light line level here. It's basically make sure that once you go over that line, you need to use some external light, or you start introducing ambient light into the frame to be able to add more light. For barcoding situations, or issues where you're going fast or on a conveyor belt or somebody's moving a box underneath it, you want to have short exposure times, right? So this light is designed, the internal light is designed to be very bright, very, very powerful, and very short. Right? We're overdriving these things, giving you the maximum amount of light at a very low shutter speed. When you play with these, or if you put these side by side with the competitors that are out there, you're going to notice that you can achieve a lot at a low level of light than you might not have in the past. So this is really a very cool feature of this device. We also have 3 different ways you can power these devices, right? Remember, we talked a little bit about the USB. We had that USB-A versus like USB-C, those types of things. That also affects that exposure time, right? So if I plug this in through USB-C, that exposure time, I might not be able to draw that full power to give me that 2 millisecond exposure time, right? So that bar, we're going to automatically move down to the left for you, such that you won't overdraw and stop the camera or brown it out, right? So that little red bar is going to move depending on which power source you have. Up at the top, you see here, I'm on 24-volt power supply. It says power source up here. So it's a quick indication of what I'm using. You also have PoE plus. So if I had PoE plus, and each one of these is going to adjust. Another adjustment that goes into effect is the digital I/O we talked about. Remember, GPIO 4 through GPIO 8 are digital I/Os. That means they pull the power from the camera to send the power out, right? So if I start activating all of those, you'll see this exposure, or this maximum red line, will start moving to the left, because I'm taking the power that was available for the light, I'm using it somewhere else, and I'll start not being able to use it for my light. So we want to make sure we're not having any kind of brownout situations, any kind of power consumption problems, even though you have that full flexibility to use each and everything. It's actually an advantage. You might be thinking, man, that's kind of sucky. It's actually an advantage, because that means you're always going to be able to set the application up and know that you're going to have enough power to do it. Believe it or not, in a lot of the other systems that you may be using today, they don't have these types of controls or these types of indications. That means you could theoretically create a condition where you could brown out the camera or have inefficiency or inconsistencies in the applications. We felt it better to point these things out and allow you to be able to understand and know what kind of power limitations and restrictions you have. Again, we also have the ability to have multiple different types of ways of power, so we also thought it necessary to do that. You can see here is my hand, just to show you that it is in live view. Over at the top right-hand side of the screen, you can see it's flashing live view, so you know you're in live view. And I thank you all for that feedback. That was one of the #1 beta things that we got, from people is like, I don't know when I'm in live view or not live view. So we indicated here with the flashing live view, almost like you're in a recording session. So I just wanted to point that little feature out there. If I come out of the live view, you can see here now it's no longer true. You can't see it, but it's no longer triggering, but that's okay. We have a setting called long exposure. So you can see this slider bar currently taps out at 14 milliseconds. When you're using a single shot modes, all right, so this is more for maybe for machine vision, you could click this long exposure button, and this will allow you to go up to 750 milliseconds of exposure time using the external lights. All right, so for those applications where you're trying to do an inspection from 10 feet away, and you need 30 milliseconds of exposure, you could click this box. It'll change the scaling of this particular, go from 14 milliseconds to 750 milliseconds. You could adjust and make that change and time there just by checking that box. So very useful piece when dealing with those types of applications where you need to go beyond 14 milliseconds of exposure. Again, here's our gain. Gain works best. Sometimes you need it. You want to run low exposure times, but you need a little bit brighter of an image. You could play with the gain levels there. One note, gain does affect noise. So at some point, if you go to a gain of 3, you might see some noise in your image. So usually gains of 0 and 1 are preferred. I did demonstrate the focus a little bit. There's an aimer for both machine vision and a barcode reading. Since it is the same exact device, same hardware that's there, it is actually very useful to have an aimer on a machine vision camera. We've been playing a lot today, doing this week, doing a lot of different inspections and trying things up. It's a Starburst pattern. If you've played with your devices, you've seen it. At between about 10 to 12 inches, the pattern is about the same size of the field of view. So it is a nice indication of knowing where your field of view is and what you're looking for. So if you're on a ladder like 6 feet in the air trying to point your camera, it makes it a heck of a lot easier. And that's one of the things we were doing earlier today. And it was, we were like, man, I'm glad we put this thing in. It was very, very useful. Next item down is the internal illumination. I could enable it and disable it. I also have the ability to do a light intensity control. This one's currently set to 10. And then I have my ability to have my different light boards, my top and the bottom. I have that capability there. If I do set up the external light control under my device settings, this is where I could come in here and turn it on and then adjust some availability or I would say light intensity, if you will, to be able to handle that. So that's kind of some of those particular settings there. One thing to note, right here, you would see this, you're like, hey, that looks pretty overexposed, and you're right, it does. Our algorithms tend to work really good on really dark images. So that's something to keep in mind, is that, the darker, we could read these things in the dark. It's kind of weird. Play with it when you get your units. The algorithms like light don't need a lot of bright light. So you don't ever really have to overexpose or ask for a lot of light from your devices. So another cool thing just to point out, one of those notes where it says, hey, this image looks really dark. However, the camera is going to love it and eat it up and enjoy it. So that's another cool piece.